Tonight we're going to hear from Dr. Faith Campbell. She has a Ph.D. in politics from Princeton University. She has worked as an advocate for biological conservation for environmental advocacy organizations like the Natural Resource Defense Council, American Lands Alliance, the Nature Conservancy, and more recently, the Center for Invasive Species Prevention. She also did some work for a group that I was heavily involved with, the National Association of Exotic Pest Plant Councils, which was eventually turned into Invasive Plant Councils. She did a lot of work on invasive plants for a while, and then she started switching her concentration to non-native species of insects and pathogens. These are all invasive that attack native tree species, especially ones here in North America. She's currently the president of the Center for Invasive Species Prevention. She's going to talk about, or the title of her talk is Maryland Trees Under Attack, What We or You Can Do. So I'll let Faith take it away and she can explain the rest from here. So thank you, Faith.
So thank you, Jill. And we've been partners in crime for decades. So Jill's introduced me pretty well here. I thought I'd tell you what this picture is and where it was taken. It was taken on Mattawoman Creek, and those are ash trees killed by the emerald ash borer. And of course, the ash are not alone in suffering this fate. I'm going to talk about more or less half dozen species: chestnuts, dogwoods, ash, hemlocks, elms, sassafras, viburnum, starting with chestnut. Of course, the chestnut was an important tree in the early up until recently. It's been hit by two major pathogens, Phytophthora cinnamomi and chestnut-like Gryphonectria parasitica. The first one came in early in the 19th century and the second one late in the 19th century. There are also several introduced insects that are attacking it. Of course, chestnut was a very important tree in the forest from sea level up to 5,000 feet. It's important both for the nuts that are consumed, for the leaf litter that controlled much of the soil chemistry of the forest, and also for the hollow centers and other holes depended on by many species of wildlife. And of course, people used it too for the wood, for the bark in tanning leather, and feeding their livestock, especially pigs. It was a real foundation of the Appalachian settlers' economy until it was wiped out. Dogwood gets a lot less attention, but it used to be a very important species in the understory, with the fruit and the twigs and leaves serving for food, habitat for nesting birds, and again, leaves providing an important source of calcium in the soil. Dogwood anthracnose was introduced, well, it was evident by the middle 70s, who knows when it was introduced, and it's pretty much eliminated flowering dogwood from the forest, although you can certainly still find it growing out in open sunny areas where the fungus is not so damaging. Eastern hemlock, of course. Two major foreign pests have been introduced that attack hemlocks, the hemlock woolly adelgid and the elongate hemlock scale. And hemlocks are really unique in the eastern deciduous forest because they create dense, dark groves or forests that really have very unique soils, unique moisture conditions, unique species. They're particularly important in buffering streams and preventing sunlight from reaching them, changing their temperature and growing algae. And these areas are depended on by many species of wildlife, ranging from deer to warblers to salamanders. And as we all know, they also are just beautiful trees. The ash. Several ash trees are native to Maryland, green, white, and black. One major pest has been established, the emerald ash borer. And there's one lurking in Europe, the ash decline fungus, that we hope our officials are able to keep from getting in. I think ash is a little more, they're not as unique as hemlocks, but they certainly play an important role in ecosystems, particularly in riparian and wetland areas. They prevent erosion, they maintain cool water temperatures. Again, the leaf litter has specific chemical aspects that are important for both the soil and particularly for aquatic invertebrates. They provide coarse woody debris. And there's been estimated that at least 100 species of invertebrates, especially lepidopterans, depend on them. One of the problems, of course, is that other trees that grow in the riparian areas, one of them, of course, used to be elms, and I'll get to that in a minute. American beech makes me want to scream. American beech are threatened by two principal pests, and there are a couple of others hanging out in the margins. Beech bark disease was introduced in the last third or so of the 19th century to Nova Scotia and has been moving west and south ever since, and has reached pretty much all of the northern habitat of beech, but is still spreading to the south. And then at the beginning of the 21st century, just 20 odd years ago, a new disease was introduced, beech leaf disease, and it has spread very fast. It's gone from Cleveland, Ohio to Maine, up into Ontario, down into Virginia and such like, just since 2012. And this map doesn't show the detections in Maryland that were made this year or at the end of last year, but there are 8 counties in Maryland where it's known to be established, and that's probably just the beginning. Beech, again, has a very important ecosystem role. It's extremely widely distributed, although it's the only species in the genus. It's a component of many forest types. Again, it creates a different forest system with a considerable shade that inhibits establishment of less tolerant saplings. Has an important role in nutrient cycling. At least one author has said it has a low vulnerability to climate change. The nuts are very important for wildlife, particularly not so much here in Maryland, but farther north up at New England and Canada, where the oaks don't grow, and it's one of the few sources of hard mast. And again, cavities, it's a tree that is often used by cavity nesters and such like. Okay, American elm is a little different, or American elm and slippery elm. It's under attack by at least 4 introduced species, particularly Dutch elm disease. The 2 insects, Chevy beetle and zigzag sawfly, are it's less clear what their impact will be, and the fungus at the bottom has just been detected, so nobody knows yet. With Dutch elm disease, it isn't that the trees are being killed off outright and disappearing, it's that they are no longer canopy emergent giant trees. Now they're much smaller ones. And at least some authors believe that although they're still numerous, having them be much smaller will have effect on floodplain communities' composition, structure, and successional dynamics. And again, one of their associates in the wetland systems, ash, of course, are now being severely depleted by emerald ash borer. So we've got at least 2 of the species that normally would form the riparian communities in our area under severe threat. Viburnum, this is the arrowwood, and I gather from Dr. Rauch of University of Maryland, it's both native to Maryland and one of the viburnum species most vulnerable to the viburnum leaf beetle introduced from Europe. Again, normal ecosystem services, but it's one of the flowering plants of the eastern deciduous forest. Does emerald ash borer have a life cycle? Well, yes, of course it does. I'll get to it. And the saplings that are coming up now are going to be eaten by the emerald ash borer when they get big enough, unless the biocontrol agents really get control on that problem. Sassafras, this is an approaching problem. There's a disease called laurel wilt that was introduced in Savannah, Georgia, and it attacks species in the Lauraceae family. It's pretty much wiped out red bay and swamp bay, which are native to Florida, Georgia, the Louisiana coast and such like. But now it's moving north and it is killing sassafras. You can't really see it on this map, but it's right on the Tennessee-Virginia border, probably already in Virginia. Another tree that is important as a pioneer species and as fodder for wildlife. And again, just one more of our understory trees that's in real trouble. And finally, I'm getting to oaks. Of course, they're the most numerous and widespread species in the eastern deciduous forest. And they have a number of exotic threats. The two most important are the European spongy moth that used to be called gypsy moth. And for the oaks in the red oak group, the oak wilt fungus, Ceratocystis fungicarium, sorry. Oaks are they account for most of the biomass in our eastern forests. They provide critical habitat, and in this case, at least one scientist said up to 900 species of invertebrates are dependent on oak. Again, the ecosystem services and the leaf litter, unlike some of the others that I mentioned before, oak leaves decompose more slowly, so they make up the bulk of the protective blanket on the top of the soil, as opposed to immediately providing nutrients into the soil. According to the web, Maryland has 21 species, and a dozen years ago, the Earth Society named it the Year of the Oak. It's obviously a very important part of the forests and the economy of Maryland. Spotted lanternfly, I've got question marks here because while it's definitely a nuisance at least, and a menace perhaps to vineyards and fruit orchards, it's not clear yet how much of a threat it poses to native trees. Penn State, is, the scientists listed here, have done a lot of research into that issue. They list a quite important or quite lengthy list of tree types that are fed on by spotted lanternfly, but not killed, at least not in their experience. They advise trying to slow its spread by making sure you're not transporting either eggs or adults and nymphs around on vehicles or in moving pods or other outdoor type structures. You can try to kill Ailanthus. Spice bush is a little thin. It likes things a little bit bigger. I trust you know how to kill Ailanthus, and if you don't, Penn State has some excellent advice on its website. The Penn State scientists also recommend applying pesticides to kill the nymphs, either contact pesticides or systemic pesticides, and just promoting them hanging out, or sorry, the health of the host plants. Yes, black walnut is one of the trees that it feeds on, but again, at least in their experience so far, some flagging, some branch die-offs, but not killing the tree. Lauren, could we move on? So what's being done to deal with this problem? Well, the first thing is trying to prevent the introduction of additional pests. And there are two principal pathways by which these pests have been introduced. One is on wood packaging material, and the other one is on imported plants. Scientists or USDA and allies are doing analyses to try to identify invasive traits. They're doing risk assessments of particular species and pathways. They're monitoring the presence of pests in trade partners that might travel to our shores. In some cases, but in my view, not often enough, they're tightening the requirements for imports and customs, more so than APHIS, more so than USDA, has raised the monetary penalties for shipments that violate the rules. Another approach is to strengthen early detection. USDA manages a program called CAPS, Cooperative Agriculture Pest Survey, with the 50 states and several territories, the DC and several territories. It specifies which organisms or the entities you're supposed to be looking for. There's a constant effort to improve identification tools and access to them. I have to say some states are more aggressive about looking than others. I can't specifically comment on Maryland. I'm not sure how it ranks. And then there's increasing recognition of the importance of the citizen scientist, as most of the time newly introduced species are detected by people outside of official agencies. And so I certainly encourage members of the Maryland Native Plant Society to be on the lookout, how to report to EDMAPs and other systems. Some state agencies encourage that. Some don't want to be inundated by citizen reports, so you kind of have to feel your way around about that. I'm illustrating here the diagnostic behavior of the elm zigzag sawfly, which is here in the Mid-Atlantic. If you go out looking at elm trees, you might start to see this. At the early stages, the larva creates this zigzag pattern in the leaves. There's a lot of there's some research into trying to improve the understanding of the various pest life cycles and their ecological requirements. Some of that research is paid for by the Forest Service Research and Development system hierarchy, some of it by its Forest Health Protection hierarchy. Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, sorry, has a methods development program, and it funds a good deal. It funds $60-something million every year in of various kinds of activities by partners through the Section 7721 Plant Pest and Disease Management and Disaster Prevention Program. Not sure why they couldn't come up with a shorter name. Agriculture Research Service gets involved, particularly if it's a threat to something with horticultural importance. National Institute of Food and Agriculture, of course, supports some academic research. And academics do get involved, but usually if they're funded by USDA. And some businesses have done some serious and important work in the research area. One of the most important things and one of the most poorly implemented programs is trying to slow spread within the United States of pests once they are established in one place. There are two basic approaches to this. One is educating the public to avoid moving pests, and the Don't Move Firewood program, buy it where you burn it, etc., is certainly the most established of these, and operates throughout the continent. Another approach is to regulate movement of vectors of the pests, and I'm illustrating there the regulation for Asian longhorn beetle quarantine area. That one happened to be in Canada, but it's the same idea everywhere. Sudden oak death on rhododendron bush is being shipped around in interstate commerce. And of course, the spotted lanternfly can attach itself to pods and other things. The regulations are patchy. They vary considerably. There's some federal regulations There are the 50 states all do it differently. Some are aggressive, some are lackadaisical. In the case of the spotted lanternfly, everybody agrees that the most risky places are the consolidation yards where railroads and trucks and such like bring in goods from everywhere, shift them around and take them out again. And the companies that run those, the railroad companies principally, are being quite negative about letting authorities from the Department of Agriculture in to check things or to try to eradicate the ailanthus that also thrives in those places. So it's kind of a mess. There is research looking at how to improve control methods. Nobody likes it when you have to take down all the trees, as seen there in Chicago when the Asian longhorn beetle established. But often that's the most effective, and certainly at the beginning, often that's the only thing anybody knows to do. A number of trees and pests can now be treated using injected systemic herbicides or pesticides, as illustrated there, both ash on the one side and hemlock on the other. And of course, biocontrol. Funding for research from USDA is shrinking, and that's going to become a bigger problem as the years go by. It's already a problem and it's going to get worse. Again, I mentioned the Plant Protection Act section 7721, which has funding that is not subject to annual appropriations. So it's a more steady source of funding, but it's a very long application process. So it's not good for moving quickly. There are treatments for individual trees. Hemlocks can be treated with injection, soil drench, or foliar chemicals. And the Forest Service is demonstrating that opening up areas where saplings are growing, increasing sunlight, reaching the canopy can help them overcome hemlock woolly adelgid. The newest and most exciting individual treatment is the one for beech. Bartlett tree experts, and I provide Matthew Borden is the scientist who did it. They've developed a foliar spray for using on small trees and a injection method for the large trees. Of course, these things are expensive and suitable really only for individual high value trees. It involves a new application. The chemicals have been used in arboriculture for years, but they're not previously registered for use on beech. They're getting emergency, various states are getting emergency exemptions from FIFRA to start applying to beech. It's my understanding that Maryland is in the process of completing that emergency approval. And I think Matt said that the District of Columbia is probably not going to be, there's a limited number of emergency approvals you can get, and the District of Columbia is probably not going to get one. So that's a problem. But if you have beech trees, contact Bartlett and start inquiring about what you can do to protect it. What do they inject into hemlock? It's emamectin benzoate, I think, and imidacloprid, most likely. Imidacloprid is the best. And I know people don't like it because of the effects on pollinators, but hemlocks are wind pollinated, so it's less of a problem there. Yes, insecticides. You don't kill insects using something else, or in the case of beech, they're fungicides. Dutch elm disease, of course, there have been treatments for that for some decades. You can also make sure that you plant them far enough apart that they don't develop root grafts. And there are an increasing number of cultivars that are suitable for landscape, for parks and yards. And their Forest Service, the Nature Conservancy, the University of Minnesota, and others are working on trying to breed trees that would be sufficiently resistant that they could be put out into the forest. So we have, I hope things are going to eventually show up for that purpose. With oak wilt, you have to do prevention because once the tree is infected, you can't cure it. The first step, of course, is not moving around logs or firewood, then avoiding wounding the trees during the period when the vector insects are flying, and cutting root connections, which is a pretty messy process, involves pretty severe digging around the tree. And then biocontrol. The biggest programs are those for hemlock and ash, emerald ash borer. 4 wasps have been released to attack emerald ash borer at various stages of its development, from egg to larger larvae and pupae. And the scientists are doing the work report that they're suppressing emerald ash borer in saplings and smaller trees, but not yet the larger ones. So we're still probably going to lose what's left of the large ash, and hope that so far there's quite a vigorous growth of seedlings and saplings. Hope that they can be protected enough to eventually replace them. Spongy moth has been protected quite effectively, or has been dealt quite effectively with BTK and NPV. BTK is a fungus, I guess, and NPV is a virus, which are pretty effective at killing spongy moths. So they're not as, there are weather and other conditions that make it less effective in some areas, but it's much less of a threat than it used to be.
Could I interject for a second? This is
Yeah.
Jill.
Yeah.
The bacillus is a bacteria.
Right.
And
sorry.
yeah, that's the one that can affect many species of Lepidoptera.
Yep.
The Entomophaga maimaga is the fungus that was released that spread around, that's killing a lot of the gypsy moth nowadays, which is wonderful. So
right. Yeah,
okay.
Sorry, Jill, you're right.
That's okay.
People have been trying for 30 years to find biocontrols to protect hemlock, and I don't know how many have been released, but at least 2 or 3 from Japan and 1 from the Pacific Northwest, and they're just not yet protecting the trees adequately. So now they've gone to a different, those were predatory beetles that ate the hemlock woolly adelgid at various stages. Now they're looking at a different group of insects, silver flies, Leucopas, and they're hoping that they will add. What the Leucopas do is they attack at a different part of the life cycle during the summer. All the other organisms attack during the winter or early spring, and they need something that's going to attack the hemlock woolly adelgid during the summer. They're hoping Leucopas will do that. Yes, Mark, I see your.
Okay, over the last few decades, I've been keeping track of biological controls, and the issue, of course, is whether they're host specific. So there's a lot of these species you talked about, there actually is a biological control that has a potential in addition to the ones that are being released. But the tag, the Adjutant General hasn't approved their release yet because we haven't proved that they won't attack natives. Now, what's happened in the last few decades is that standard of how host specific they have to be keeps jumping back and forth. So sometimes you have to be 100% sure. Other times, if the invasive species is really serious, you don't have to be 100% sure, which I would tend to agree with, but I just wanted to give you that background.
Right. Yes, well, I at least am glad that they're being a lot more specific, although it does present numerous challenges. The last approach, and it shouldn't be the last one, people should start it earlier, is to breed resistant trees. And it takes time, and success is not guaranteed, but if we're going to have chestnuts and ash and hemlocks and elms, then and beech, they're going to be ones that we're assisted by breeding. Of course, chestnut, it's the American Chestnut Foundation and the American Chestnut Conservation Foundation. The picture shows, I think those are 30-year-old chestnuts grown by American Chestnut Conservation Foundation from all North American lingering chestnut background, no Chinese, no GE. And as you can see, they've gotten them pretty big. The situation with the elms and the hemlocks and the ash, and particularly the beech, is not, I mean, that's still a mess. I list here some of the groups that are involved. The Nature Conservancy's New Hampshire chapter is doing a lot of work with the elms. There's a North Carolina Hemlock Restoration Initiative, which is both trying to protect existing trees and supporting breeding. And then a number of scientists in the Forest Service and at Holden Arboretum formed the Great Lakes Basin Forest Collaborative. They're working on hemlock, beech, and ash. And we have to hope that they are successful. They are also looking for money. There are a lot of complications. And this deals most with the breeding. First, when you see an ash tree or a hemlock or a beech that's still healthy looking, is it healthy because it's truly resistant to the pest, or is it just lucky and hasn't gotten hit yet? Learning how to propagate these things can be quite tricky. Some of them are easy to graft, some of them are not. Some of them flower early, some of them do not. There's a lot of learning, and then of course you have to learn how to propagate them in sufficient numbers to first test whether they're resistant, and then if they are, to grow enough to be able to put them out in the woods. And even keeping the pest alive, you have to keep the pest alive so that you can use it to test your trees, and that's not so easy either. The folks in Michigan who are breeding the emerald ash borer biocontrols are importing, I've forgotten now what they said, tons and tons of ash branches all the time because they need ash leaves to feed emerald ash borers to become the food source for the biocontrol agents that they're raising. It's quite an exercise. And then there's also the question of where they need land to plant the test plantings, and they have to be able to protect the seedlings from deer and rabbits and beavers and everybody else. And then eventually, we hope they're going to need to have places where they can plant trees that they hope will grow to adult size. However, the biggest problem is not the science. The biggest problem is the inadequate and unreliable funds, particularly from the federal agencies, and the lack of facilities where they can do the work. So now we get to how you can help. And I certainly hope that the 1,300 members of the Maryland Native Plant Society, at least some of them will decide that they want to participate in some of these areas. First, if you're probably better skilled than many other people to do some of the detection and monitoring of pests and monitoring of the efficacy of biocontrol agents, and to search for lingering hosts, those that are still alive when all the ones of the same species around them are dead or dying. I list here some of the organizations that would want to work with you on these issues. I have the question marks at the Nature Conservancy because I think it does probably vary from chapter to chapter. You can support these programs by volunteer work. They need weed control, they need to plant, they need other such activities. If you have land, maybe you can provide facilities where they could grow their test trees. And of course, you can give money. Virtually all these organizations are tax exempt, and you can get a tax break for your donation. The kind of work that I particularly lean toward is building support for these programs in the political system. You can lobby department leaders and legislatures at the state and federal level. You can educate the media. We really do need to educate the media because they just do not cover this issue appropriately. And you can educate colleagues in the Native Plant Society and other scientific and conservation organizations about the threat and about the solutions, and try to recruit them into lobbying for the kinds of programs that would actually help restore forest trees that have been hit by non-native pests. Politicians love to march at the head of a parade. It's up to us to create the parade. So let's go do it. You don't have to scribble this. I have sent to Jill and Lauren a separate slide with this information on it. You can see how to reach me. You can see how to look at my blogs. And if you want to know a lot more information, and particularly citations, sources, et cetera, and so forth about the various introduced pests that I talked about, the Don't Move Firewood website has has profiles of many of these, or probably all of these. If you go to the invasive species tab, and then you can go down you can search for them alphabetically by either Latin or common name. And I think that's it. Thank you. I'm ready to answer some more questions.
All right, thank you very much, Faith. Okay, Mark Imlay, go ahead, Mark.
A good example of my question is the research done about 10 years ago for the American chestnut. They brought in a few genes from Eurasian chestnut that are resistant to the blight, and they worked on it to reduce it so the percent of change in the genes was very low and still effective. So that the result is that this chestnut is almost like the native chestnut. But the question is, and with other species, how well do we have to make sure that the modified tree is acting right in the environment? And of course, sometimes it's just a matter of finding an individual that is resistant and then growing those in the lab and then releasing those. And I think that is safer. But that's my question both ways of getting a new tree that is resistant to the disease. But how much does it modify the environment compared to the original? I think it does more good than harm, but still, that's my question.
Yeah, well, the scientists who are working on breeding resistant trees are certainly aware of that problem. Most of them are still at a much earlier stage. They're still looking to find trees that appear to be sufficiently resistant, which they can then breed together to try to increase the proportion of resistance in their progeny and keep doing that through a couple of generations. But yes, I think the two that have been the couple that have been most successful so far are conifers out west, some of the white pines and the Port Orford cedar. And I don't think anybody's satisfied with where we are on the eastern deciduous forest trees yet. But it's going to take a while. It takes time. And with the chestnut, the American Chestnut Foundation found that their back-crossed with the Chinese chestnuts were not sufficiently resistant. And so then they have started using genetic engineering to integrate a gene from wheat into the chestnut, and that's showing promise, but it's their embarrassment, not mine. But they messed up some record keeping and ended up spending most of their effort on one of the genetic lines that is not going to do well in the competition in the forest because of they hope it's because of the way that they inserted the new gene. And so now they're starting from not scratch, but several steps back with a different line which also shows a good deal of resistance. But they need to make sure that, as you say, it looks like a chestnut, it acts like a chestnut, it can compete when growing in the forest. So they're
Well,
They're
thank you.
working on that. They're working on that. Everybody's aware of the need to do that.
Okay, thank you. Ken Bauer.
Yes, hi. Question about the systemic injections. If you inject a tree with an insecticide, will any insect that eats any part of that tree be killed? And what about if a bird eats the insect before the insect dies? I asked an arborist about this and he had no clue.
Oh, well, that's too bad. I am not a biologist. I'm a political scientist, but it is my expectation that any insect that eats a part of a tree with a systemic insecticide in it is going to be affected. Whether it dies or not, I think is going to depend on the interaction between that insect and that tree and what tissues it's feeding on and how much of a dose it gets. There hasn't been a lot of squeamishness about birds and small mammals and such like eating the insects. I don't know the answer to that question though. I haven't seen much discussion of it.
All right, thank you very much.
I can chime in real quick that it does depend on the insecticide, and also I remember a length of time for emerald ash borer, how long it takes to get up into the leaves, and then the leaves fall, and so maybe by the next year the leaves wouldn't really have much chemical in them. But borers, if they're doing the same kind of thing that the emerald ash borer is doing, then they would likely be probably killed. But it does depend, and a lot of that stuff is available if you talk to people in the Forest Service who are dealing with the pests every day and looking into the insecticides and all that. So you can get answers to that help you make decisions on which chemical to use or not to use.
Right.
Okay. All right, Judy.
I wanted to say there's a question in the chat about when it's going to reach various counties. That's impossible to say, but as of I guess about a year ago, it was in at least 8 Maryland counties: Allegheny, Anne Arundel, Baltimore, Cecil, Charles, Frederick, Hartford, and Washington. I'm going to share a map that is as of the end of last year.
We're talking about beech leaf disease, in case anybody wonders.
Yes. I do want to make a point about this.
Okay. Oh, good. You do have Maryland on your map.
Yes.
Yes.
I do have Maryland here, and I don't know whether people can read it, but 2023 is the red color.
Mhm.
And so we're talking about in 2023, it spread into all sorts of different counties, the
No,
8
it didn't.
counties.
In 2023, they finally discovered it.
Right.
It didn't spread there in 23. It's been spreading for a decade, but they finally found it.
Right. Now, they have been testing for it. So this is the first time the traps found it. And also the sightings found it.
Right.
So if they just discovered it in these counties last year, it's probably busy spreading into other counties in Maryland.
Right.
It will probably be in all Maryland counties in very short order.
Yeah. Yeah. And in Virginia too. I mean, I live in Fairfax, and when I go out in parks in Fairfax, I'm looking up at the leaves. So far, I haven't seen it where I look, but it's a lot more widespread than we know. Hello, Gabe.
So I know that you covered that, but I
Yeah.
just wanted to emphasize, based on the question that was in the chat.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
that it's moving. It wasn't that long ago that it was just found that people were only seeing it in Ohio, not that it hadn't been other places, as you were saying. But this is not, something that might be spreading in 50 years from now. It might be a concern. It's a concern right now.
Okay.
Gabe, you can go ahead and unmute.
Thanks. Thanks for the presentation, Faith. Just a quick question. I was curious that those pure American chestnuts that you showed in that photo from the ACCF,
Right.
if you know where those are growing.
It's in Virginia. I think it's in the Jefferson National Forest. I can tell you, I can look and tell you where they are.
Dwayne, if you want to go ahead and unmute.
Yes, and I was going to mention the American chestnut cooperators because we have been growing trees from seed nuts from them. They're based out of Virginia Tech, and I think a lot of the trees are growing in that general area. I don't know. We actually visited a couple of their orchards. My question was kind of related. We have a little bit of land available. Do you or does anyone know of other organizations that are doing, that have a model like what Chestnut Cooperators is doing of sending out either seedlings or seed nuts to individuals to plant as part of the process? Because I would love to try some other trees also.
I would suggest you contact the North Carolina Hemlock Restoration Initiative if you're in a place that's appropriate for hemlock, because I think they're planting hemlocks. I'm not sure about the others. The Great Lakes people are obviously a little far away at the moment. I would love to see something start in the Chesapeake, in the Mid-Atlantic. But I don't know if there's enough people interested yet to make that happen. But
Thank you.
Sure.
Marianne, you want to go ahead and unmute?
Okay, I just have a quick question. I have a very wooded property, and we keep having to cut down trees because they're dying. And I have a red oak that's now dying right near the house. And I was wondering, is it a bad idea to leave a good portion of the trunk standing? Because I've read that's good for, maybe woodpeckers or whatever. But now I'm worried that if I leave the trunk up, is that going to provide, like a place for whatever has been killing this tree, a way to spread even farther with more of the trees that I have?
I'm a political scientist. Sorry. I mean, the risk is there, particularly if it's oak wilt. If it's where are you, out west in the western part of the state?
No, I'm in Montgomery County.
Montgomery County.
I know that I had one killed by ambrosia beetle. Another one was killed by, I think, some kind of fungus. And I've lost several ash trees. I mean, it's like I'm not gonna have any forest anymore.
Right. Well, we know what killed the ash trees. I don't know. I'm afraid you're going to have to ask someone who's a real scientist.
Okay, thanks.
Mark, you can go ahead and unmute.
Hey, I have a 200-acre park in Charles County where I'm the volunteer conservation manager, removing the invasives and all that. We've kept up very well, except Japanese steelgrass. But the question is, it's abundant with Fagus grandifolia. So should I be watching out for something? Since I've removed the invasives, that may help it anyway in some other way we don't know about.
Well, it's in the neighborhood. Beech leaf disease is coming to get you, Mark. It has very distinctive symptoms. Google it. You can see lots of examples of the symptoms. The most obvious are the stripes on the leaves. This is a good time of year to be looking for the stripes on their leaves. They're much more conspicuous at this time of year than they are in the spring. So yeah, I would suggest that everybody, the Mid-Atlantic, a lot of our forest is mostly beech, and we're going to be in trouble.
And the one question I have, since I've done a almost perfect job removing the invasive plants,
Mhm.
no tree ever falls down anymore. Does that help the beech tree survive better if the other invasives are not, if the other invasives are not there?
I don't know that anybody knows the answer to that.
Maybe we can count this as a research project.
What I can say is that it's a nematode. They don't know yet how it's getting around, but it does seem to start more in wetter areas, in humid areas near creeks, etc., which is probably what you're talking about here. And it usually starts in the understory. So check Google, particularly the stuff coming out of Cleveland, and get out there and start looking from underneath at the leaves to see if they're striped.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I never need to use herbicide anymore. I'm so far along, with the exception of sometimes I have to cut stump.
Yeah, well, this is not a herbicide problem.
No.
And I don't think it's a herbicide solution either, but other kinds of pesticides, yeah, killing nematodes is tricky. But if you want to know how bad it is, go to Gabriel Popkin's website and read his wonderful article from a year ago about how important beech are to the Mid-Atlantic forest. And look at all the pictures. It's terrible. I don't want to end on that downer, though. I mean, the point of this exercise is that there are things that people are doing. There are things that could be helpful. Most of them need more support. They need more people doing them. They need more money. They need more people telling the public that it's not something we should just throw our hands up and go off and cry about it. There's something we should be doing. And I'm hoping some of you will do that.
Lauren, you can go ahead.
Thanks. So actually, I'm going to comment here as kind of a participant rather than the president, and just add that while it is pretty depressing to think about this globally problematic situation we're in here and what it means for the future, what it also says to me is that we do need to protect the existing forests, and we're not really doing very well in that front with the invasive problem. And we need to protect the genetic diversity that we have, right? That's the thing that's going to save us in the end, is that somebody out there is probably going to have some resistance. So, think about when you're sourcing your tree species, how are they being created? It's tough when they have been genetically modified to resist something. You're not going to get a tremendous amount of diversity there, but for the ones that are remaining, all species, anything that you plant, really try to go for a diverse, genetically diverse option, because that's how you're going to avoid some of these problems, I think, in the future. And then, I think to me at least, it's very obvious that we need to do a lot more work on the political end of this problem to get some funding cooking for solutions. The clock is ticking.
Yeah, so there's a Maryland representative very high up on the Agriculture Appropriations Subcommittee. He's probably chairman right now, and depending who's in charge next year, he'll still be. Hi, Mr. Harris.
Thank you. Yeah.
Jen, you can go ahead.
Oh, hi, thanks. This has been really informative. Thank you so much. So my question is this, it's just a citizen, and I have, a half-acre yard. I can plant 1 or 2 trees and try to like protect them at least. But you know, like talking about the you know, injecting things with pesticides and having, you know, Bartlett come every year and spray and things like that, it's really expensive. So, you know, if I can just do 1 or 2, like which one should I do? Should I plant a beech? Should I plant an oak? Should I plant a hemlock? If everything else is equal, if my yard would be able to handle like any of those, you know, I have, you know, room for 1, which one should I do?
Well, at the moment, there aren't any resistant trees, so the chestnut people are farthest along with trees, particularly the American, at this point, the American Chestnut Conservation Foundation, the ACCF. They might be happy to send you a couple of trees.
Maybe a white oak.
Well, there are lots of oaks, and oaks are good and important, but I thought she was looking for you know, moving the resistance forward, and I think chestnuts, the 2 chestnut groups are the ones farthest along, particularly ACCF.
Mhm.
Chuck, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I'm really thankful to Carol Bergman, who put me on this path about maybe 11, 12 years ago. And we've got many groups out there that, and it's only growing, of young people, old people going out and taking care of invasives. And I was curious about that blackberry, the physical removal of it, how that could be done. You know, we do have some here that we're taking out, but we've been really good at taking out a lot of species by manual labor. It's a great fitness program, a great community builder, and I've got a 1,200 square foot roof deck ready for seeds. If anybody has any native seed plants they want to keep away from deer, let me know. And also been working with Lauren a lot on this. Anyway, yeah. So Chuck at igc.org if you have any interest. Thanks.
Susan, you have your hand up. You can unmute.
Thank you. This is a great presentation. I just wanted to mention about the BT. I can't address fungicide injection, but the Bacillus thuringiensis, it's very specific to the digestive system of the caterpillar. And so the birds and the other animals that eat the caterpillar or get the BT, their digestive systems don't work the same way. So it should not, in my understanding, affect pollinators that are using the tree or whatever, although it may affect pollinator larvae that eat the tree other than the, you know, the good ones as well as the bad ones. But it's pretty specific to larvae. And I don't think the animals that eat it get any kind of problem from eating a larvae that has ingested the BT. That's all. I just heard the conversation and thought I'd inject that a little bit.
It is specific, but it's to caterpillars, so Lepidoptera, moths, butterflies, but it can kill a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of species. That's why it's not really a favored spray option, because it's not specific to just the gypsy moth, which is what you should mean when you're talking about specific as the pest at hand. But you're right, it really, studies showed that it really didn't have secondary effects on birds and other wildlife that would eat them. So that, to answer that part of your point, that's totally correct. That's all.
Okay.
Bonnie, you want to unmute?
Yes, I was interested in the answer to the dogwood anthracnose question in the chat. Did I miss it, or did you already address it?
I haven't seen it.
Oh, okay. What's up there? Let's see, where do I see it?
So the question was basically talking about those issues and you know,
getting more of that. Yeah, right.
Seeing how the disease was introduced and not making that same mistake.
Well, it came in almost certainly on imports of Oriental dogwood for the horticultural trade. And I didn't go back and count it all up, but that's how the chestnut blight got in. That's how probably the beech leaf disease got in. Imports of plants, particularly woody plants, are very dangerous. Now, the US is much more careful about that than, say, the British are. We don't allow things in with root balls. We don't allow bigger than a certain size. And they have actually prohibited the introduction of woody plants from a significant of many kinds from a significant number of countries. But you know, 100 years ago, people were not careful. And even 50 years ago with dogwood anthracnose, they weren't sufficiently careful. And it's tricky, it's difficult, but you have to, in my view, the people who are responsible for these programs have to know that it's difficult, and they have to really put in the effort, and particularly for the pathogens. Insects often have some kind of symptom that you can see, but the pathogens could be dormant or completely inside the plant, and they're just very hard to find. And we need a policy that recognizes that, because we're never going to get them all back, and it's going to cost. It's costing us already millions of dollars, and wiping out ecosystems to deal with this half dozen, 10 species that I talked about, and there are many more. Politics.
Lauren, do you want to go ahead, Lauren?
Thanks. Yeah, we're still depressed, but you know. So looping back to the BT topic, I will mention that probably most of you have eaten corn that's been treated with BT. It's a very commonly used product in agriculture, and it was actually used. It is considered safe for use with organic farming. It's that kind of thing. So I wouldn't consider it a big problem in terms of the animals. You know, the insects are one thing. It's very targeted, and yes, it will kill the Lepidoptera, and it's going to get the non-target Lepidopteran as much as it will get the targeted one. But after that, it's not really an issue for birds or toads or whatever else is out there eating. So that's not a huge concern. The fungicides and things like that are an entirely different matter. I don't know that much about the specific ones, but fungicides as a general rule are more problematic. And that goes to the point of fungi are more aligned, I think, with human biology than insect biology. I believe that is why that is the case. I could be making that up though, so.
Well, I'm not going to dispute that, but I do want to remind people, we're talking about the disappearance from our forests of a dozen tree species. If we don't take a more aggressive stance in trying to deal with the ones that are already here.
Yes. And
there's no free lunch. There's no free lunch. There's a risk in both ways, but
Faith, I just want to point out too, I'm very friendly with Chuck, who spoke earlier, and he has posted in the chat that he's also very involved with Rotary Club, which has members all over the world, and does a lot of advocacy, and he's interested in connecting around that. So yeah, you guys need to get in touch.
Marion, do you want to unmute?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much. Wonderful discussion and presentation. I just wanted to loop back again to BTI and other BT products. There's been some emerging recent studies that are showing that there are trophic level effects that are not very well understood, and effects at the microbial level on at least 8 species of nematodes. So there are some limited studies. The French are a lot better. They've had more studies there that have shown effects on birds' trophic level. But there are other considerations, not the BT itself, but the products, the other ingredients, undisclosed, so-called proprietary ingredients that are thought to sometimes contain high levels of PFAS. So it's just something to be aware of, and more information is coming out about that.
David Rohrbach asked, what are reasonable criteria for deciding whether to treat tree pests prophylactically in advance of seeing the problem versus curatively? And he brought up the example of beech leaf disease, and when should we treat things prophylactically for that versus curatively?
Again, I'm a political scientist, not an arborist, but I think most people say that you should be sure that the pest is in your neighborhood before you do it. But you also don't want to wait until the tree is stressed. For example, the emamectin benzoate for ash trees, you really have to do it before the tree is carrying much of a load at all of EAB larvae. And since the beech treatments are literally 1 year old or less, less is known. But I did ask Matt when he gave his presentation 2 weeks ago about it, that he said you should be sure that there's beech leaf disease in your neighborhood before you start doing it, but don't wait. As far as the expense goes, he believes that you could treat every 3rd year, wouldn't have to do it every year. But again, it's very early in the process. But I think it's exciting to me that a private company decided that this was important enough that they were going to pursue it, and that they've actually managed to find things that look as if they'll be helpful. Because USDA is not providing, it's providing some funding, but not enough. And we were all tearing our hair out thinking about all those beech trees out there dying. So it's good to have something.
Maria, do you want to unmute?
I
Yes.
live in Washington, D.C., and we've been doing a lot of weed warrior work, as they call it, for Park Service, and removing invasives. And I noticed there was a beech tree about a year ago that had the disease where you looked under the leaf, and I distinctly saw it. I went to look at it this year, and it was perfectly healthy. I couldn't find it. So I don't know if that's a miracle or what, but I'm gonna look a little more carefully, because I think there was more than one beech tree there.
Keep your eyes on it. If you can get a GPS location for it. They certainly haven't been seeing things suddenly become healthy again in between Cleveland and Maine. So there's also the possibility that well, I don't know, keep your eye on it. And that, as I said, now is a good time to be out there looking to see whether it or its neighbors have the stripe leaf. Thank you.
And I would suggest take a lot of pictures and report it through iNaturalist and also EdMaps if you have that app. And you can contact the Cooperative Extension folks at Maryland or DC if they're still around. I can't remember. And get it identified. Have somebody come out and look at it if they want, or just send material in and be sure you've got what you got. Because there are some things that people sometimes think it might be beech leaf disease or beech, bark disease, whatever. And it might just not be it. It might just look kind of like it. So you got to figure it out for sure.
Okay. Will do.
Ken, you wanna?
Yeah, Faith, do you happen to know how old or what size caliper diameter an ash tree has to get before it'll be attacked by the emerald ash borer? I have a lot of small saplings, 1 inch and below.
I don't know, but I would think, I'm guessing that big, maybe. What's that? 2 or 3 inches diameter. They've certainly been attacking saplings at other places. So,
Oh, okay, thank you.
yep, be on the lookout, and look out for beavers. It doesn't help much, does it?
Let's give a nice round of applause to Faith. Thank you so much for speaking to us. That was really, really interesting. And see, you got a lot of questions. I told you you would. You had really good turnout and tons of questions.